Welcome to Notes to My Legal Self. Together, we explore topics of interest to in-house lawyers. Let's begin. Here's your host, Olga Mack.
Hello, everyone. It's good to see you. We are having another conversation, and this time it's about compliance and storytelling. I am thoroughly excited about our guest. She's been doing this for a long time, and without further ado, Angela, welcome to Notes to My Legal Self. I am so excited about this conversation. Look forward to your insight. For those people who haven't met you, please introduce yourself.
Yep, so I'm Angela Madathil. I'm a technology attorney. I work for a trucking company in Omaha, Nebraska. So just helping them get all the technology they need in place.
Oh, tell us more. Tracking and technology. Certainly, there's a lot more than that. What does the company do and what is the technical piece?
So as a trucking company, it's amazing how trucks are really turning into giant computers, especially as autonomous trucking is happening more and more. So there's the technology in a tablet that drivers use. That's what I was thinking of the most when we were figuring out the topic of this conversation is the drivers use that tablet, and it's a very hard job being a driver. They have to plan their route. They have to meet the federal hours of service guidelines. They have to make sure their truck is ready to go. They have to walk around it, make sure everything is working properly. And that's one piece. And then behind the scenes, we have transportation management systems to help us plan our loads and invoice customers. Lots of different pieces in there in terms of pricing. So there's a few of the technology pieces that I work on.
I love that. I've been joking that I've been driving a computer on wheels now for a decade or so.
Yeah.
It only makes sense that in trucking, which is a way more complex driving than anything that I could be doing, although it's complex for me, also is very technical. I love this. How does someone like you get up in the morning and find yourself doing the technology piece of the trucking industry? What was the route you took there?
Yeah, I went to Washburn and Topeka, Kansas, and came out in 2009, where it was a rough environment, but I'd really loved all my contracts classes. So my professor got out his book and helped me find a job in Wichita, Kansas. I did oil and gas advanced contracts, but ended up in Nebraska to be closer to my husband's family and started in-house work at an ethanol manufacturing company and just started learning as companies are doing more SaaS, so learn technology agreements there and just continue to build my skill set in that area.
And did you go straight in-house or?
I had a few law firm roles before, but my family has always owned their own businesses. And I really came into college with a lot of credits and figured out too late in the game I should have done business, but I promised myself I would get my MBA. So I did that too. And I just love the business side, the opportunity to really support what they're doing, making money, making a difference, and bringing that into the practice of law.
I love that. Tell me more. I'm just curious because you clearly have experience running or being educated in running businesses. You have strong interest. You've been maybe at a law firm for a little while. Sounds like you had a very strong pull in-house. What it is about in-house jobs, what it is about being close to building technology and being so close to the business that you find appealing. And maybe someone who is making decision, do I have many clients and operate at a law firm versus going in-house and have one client that I know very well? How do you make that decision? What do you like about it? Maybe what are some things you wish were different? Just curious how you thought about it and whether that reality matches to what you're experiencing today.
Yeah, law firms, I found it really hard that you would get this very discreet question. And I do the same now when I'm sending things to outside counsel because they're expensive. So I'm like, just answer this very narrow question. But when you're an in-house attorney, your value is to be in the room, to know all the different parts of what the business is doing. That's when we add the most value. So I love that opportunity to really understand all the systems, where the business is going. Our company does a great job of quarterly updates. So we literally understand every quarter. Our CEO gets up and tells everybody, this is how things went. This is where we're going. This is how we're going to do it. This is what we need from you. So it's just, our company does a great job of just having one story that they tell internally and externally. So I think it's great to get to know the business people and the people. So there's the people at the top making the decisions, and then there's the people actually using the technology. And I love getting to know both of them and their stories and we'll talk about this more later, I'm sure, but just understanding the pain points of the end user and how we can work on our technology to solve those pain points and just ultimately win at the end of the day.
Yeah, I love your observation around the trade-off between breadth and depth, especially going deep on the pain points of a user and understanding their experiences. And obviously, as a lawyer, you're not actually coding. And frankly, you probably have never driven a truck. I haven't. Have you?
Yeah, actually, they bring in our outside counsel, especially on the litigation side, every couple of years. And so I got to sit in on that, and I did. It was like,
right? I love that.
Yeah, it's in our yard, a controlled environment where there's no one else, but they have cones. And yeah, I got to drive around. It's very hard. I'm just so impressed with what our drivers do every day.
I love that. So that brings me to a question. How do you put yourself in the shoe of your user? How do you become empathetic? How do you practice law with all the sort of coldness and focus that it requires, and yet still being empathetic about the real experiences of men and women who are driving these things, building important produce and products into every home in the United States, and build something that makes their lives and their jobs a lot easier and hopefully enjoyable? How do you educate yourself to put yourself in that shoe?
I follow the lead of our leaders at Werner. They would always engage with our drivers on LinkedIn. We have some drivers really active there. And so I just started following some of the drivers and connected with them. And there's one in particular that she's one of our lady professional drivers and have become friends with her. She even joined us like for Christmas dinner and stuff. She's so impressive, and just keeping in touch with her, what she's dealing with, the day-to-day challenges and annoyances with her tablet, things that we can do better. So I think it's not always easy. It's not always going to be right there. But when you have that opportunity to engage with people and become friends, I think that's when we provide the most value.
I love following the driver piece. I've seen a few YouTube channels and LinkedIn as well. Some people actually take you for a ride as they're doing their routes, and as they're going through various weighing and different things that you have to do on the road. It's actually quite interesting. Something that I normally don't encounter in my real life. I grew up in the city and haven't had access to folks who do this every day. So it was really interesting to see what happens en route, so to speak. I'm curious, there's upside of going in-house and being close to the business, getting to know customers, follow them on the road, so to speak. But there's, of course, a downside. As to everything, there's a sort of a trade-off. What is the downside? Which you wish were different, or anything you could change, or something that folks should consider as they go in-house to a company building technology in such a niche area?
I think the hardest part is the budget side of it, that companies, sometimes they make a lot of money, sometimes they don't. Markets change even. I know my company does a great job, but just there's been 3 years of a freight recession. So I think when there are layoffs, those are really hard, especially within our legal department. And so I think just having the right mindset of being personally frugal as much as you can financially, making good decisions so that you're not as stressed out about that when those things happen, and understanding that it's not always personal, but it's still hard when friends get laid off and things like that. So just trying to have the right mindset about it, of resilience, and still connecting with why we're doing this. We keep America moving. So it's motivating even through the hard times, but I do hate the layoffs part.
Yeah, no, there is this part. And when you're close to the business, you're riding the wave up, but you also can have to maybe sometimes deal with recessions in smaller sectors, or restructures, or compliance, which is a unique piece. In trucking industry has a very different compliance piece than, for example, you see in other things. So I'm curious, you mentioned you were interested in contracts. And contracts and compliance, while contracts have piece of compliance, that's not usually the full compliance piece. So how did you get into the compliance piece of it?
Yeah, it just seems like with being a technology attorney, that's why I position myself that way. Because I feel like when I am supporting the technology parts of our business, I have to understand the privacy laws, especially, have become a big thing of making sure when I'm working on our contracts that our vendors are properly handling our data. And so there's compliance there. And then as AI has gotten bigger, understanding those compliance challenges too. It just seems like if you're really supporting the business, compliance is probably part of it. I know some companies have a little bit more separate compliance function, but the last few that I've been at, it's more integrated. So it just seems like it's part of understanding what's happening in my areas and supporting them.
And do you have a preference? I've done both too. And sometimes it correlates with size, sometimes it correlates with culture. And as I mentioned, you definitely have a compliance piece in your contract, but also compliance is a standalone piece. So do you have a preference, and how do you approach compliance, and what kind of tools do you use to make sure that it is all around compliance, not just in contracts?
Yeah, I feel like my position maybe has changed on that. I used to think a separate compliance function was maybe best because then there could be kind of separation. We could each kind of collaborate to work towards our goals. But now that I really see when a business, I guess maybe it's because it's transportation so highly regulated, our people that are doing recruiting and operations, they just have to have a really good understanding of the laws that are governing them. So maybe it's highly regulated areas. The business has to be following that too. So I think it works pretty well that way.
Yeah, I have experience in fintech. And I used to joke that compliance is our business. You can't have the business unless you have compliance. You will be very quickly shut down. And if you approach it this way, then compliance is not just part of contracts or a separate function. Every business professional, including lawyer, has to really deeply and widely understand what it means and bake it into every stage of the business.
Yeah, for sure.
So how do you approach it in to make sure that that compliance piece is baked in and everyone is responsible? The approach, then it's not just legal's job to comply. Every new product, every new collateral, yes, every new contract has to have that piece. What is your general sort of strategy and philosophy on approaching it?
Yeah, I think it's probably annoying to my colleagues sometimes, but anytime I'm touching a process or touching a contract, I just want to understand our process of dealing with it. And so that's where we'll check in. Do we have a consent there? Is there anything else we need to do? You asked earlier about tools. And we've got a lot of great law firms we work with that will send updates when new laws happen, keeping updated on LinkedIn. And then we use Practical Law a lot too for like forms and Westlaw for research. But yeah, I think just whenever I'm working with the business, hey, this is what you told me before we were doing. Is that still what we're doing? Has anything changed? So just trying to make sure I have a good understanding of processes whenever I encounter them.
Yeah, and you mentioned AI. I now joke that I time how long it takes us to mention AI, and 10 minutes into our conversation, we're talking about it. How did AI change your business and perhaps maybe even approach to compliance?
Yeah, it's been just as a legal professional been really helpful. Legal teams are lean. We have one person in each area at our company. So having a second set of eyes that can just always review what I'm doing, or if we're negotiating, quickly get me a provision. We use Gemini a lot now. We had been using Copilot, but we have kind of models we've trained within Gemini on, for example, our transportation agreement guidelines, technology agreement guidelines, where we can make our markups, but then run it through that and just make sure, did we miss anything? I do real estate too, and Gemini does a great job with that of helping, is this market, if we're, like I said, negotiating a provision, give me something to start with for drafting. So just a huge time saver. And I think we're getting better work product too.
Yeah. Do you get new insights from it or a different view of maybe looking at the same problem that you've been now looking at for a while?
I think so. I have had some interesting chats with the AI as I'm thinking through a negotiation. This is what the vendor came back with. Should we push back? What's a good middle ground? So I think it has helped me be a better lawyer, talking through things, as it were, with AI.
And do you find that in that kind of taking those insights, and if you interact with an opposing side, do you find that you're moving the ball forward or it's holding you back? Just curious.
I think it is moving things forward because I'm not in the market all the time with all these different provisions. Like maybe outside counsel sees them all the time. So I do think it helps us get to a common ground that we both can live with that's commercially reasonable a little bit faster than maybe if I were just totally working in isolation.
Yeah, I'm curious because Like a lot of contracts are not publicly available. So they're technically not what LLMs are trained on, right? They're trained on some publicly available contracts, usually outlier contracts, and for example, available on the SEC website. Those are very unique contracts that may or may not apply. And then there are some publicly available contracts in court filings or terms and conditions. But by and large, those are private data sets, not available to LLMs to be educated on, which is a little different than, for example, marketing practices or sales practices. There's a ton more publicly available information. So I'm curious, that's why I ask you, do you find it reliable, and how much of a sort of common sense, real world experiences that you have had has to modify it for you to find it reliable? And do you find it reliable, or do you find it more inspiring and maybe reframing, and still have to approach it based on your experience? Do you have kind of any thoughts about how to approach that output given the limitations of training of LLMs?
Yeah, I will say it's maybe more in the real estate area that I'm talking back and forth with the AI. I think that the SEC Edgar filings maybe get more in the real estate area. So maybe it's not just the outliers. And I found it pretty helpful. I'm really never using it verbatim, but it's helpful context, helpful starting point. Yeah, I think it just helps inform the language and negotiations, not really providing them.
Yeah, and real estate is actually largely standardized in many commercial and residential settings, right? So many of those contracts of what I would describe as essentially standard form contracts, one way or another, and either by local realtors or local practices. And many of them are fairly public. That's actually an example of contracts where a lot of things are available, even in kind of one-off deals. So you can imagine that the standard practices there are actually closer to standard.
Yeah.
And helpful. So that's a really interesting observation. Whereas in commercial deals, where you have a lot of private deals, and they vary quite a lot by industry, benchmarking against SEC. I mean, that's what I do all day. I find that the accuracy declines quite a lot because the limitation of a data set.
Yeah, I think, in the technology area, I do feel like I'm relying more on our guidelines and just our CIO's position. I've just been really blessed that we're aligned. He's very supportive of compliance points. And so I just push as hard as I can. And then even if vendors will say we're not being commercially reasonable, we'll say this is consistent with what we have with everybody, but maybe a Salesforce or a really big vendor, but we really have achieved these guidelines for the most part. So maybe it's a little different in technology.
Yeah. So that brings us to this question of storytelling in compliance, whether you are having conversation with internal folks or with folks during, say, contract negotiation that are external to your organizations. I know you're an advocate of the storytelling and the reframing and sharing. Do you have tools and kind of approaches you use that work for you, either internally or externally? Are they the same? What have been go-to tools for you to have compelling compliance conversations that keep folks engaged, that help them understand your point of view, work with you toward meeting you at least in the middle, and generally move the ball forward?
Yeah, I think it's really helpful to understand, like we started talking about AI, so how AI is going to impact the end user. There's laws about how you have to announce that AI is having conversations on the telephone. And so it's been a challenge. We want to use these bots as much as we can, but we don't want to throw off people talking to them. Is it off-putting? How do you announce that it's AI? So trying to find that common ground of not off-putting people, but being clear about what's happening. And so I've worked with leaders before that just really, they wanted to be as soft as possible, but then coming with the story of how it's going to impact the users, of like our drivers, maybe that they would actually feel really alienated even more than they already are. They're out on the road kind of handling all these challenges on their own. And if they think Werner, a person, is calling them and they're chatting and all of a sudden they realize it's AI, like they'll feel even more apart and not supported. And so that's what has sometimes helped get our leaders over the line. We have to describe it clearly, and we can find a compromise way to do it, but we have to be clear with people that this is AI from the outset. Otherwise, they will be very put off if they think it's a person and it wasn't.
Yeah, that's really I think that transparency, whether it's AI or not, especially when you are in distress on the road, possibly alone, because depending where you're driving in the United States, chances of you being alone without a whole lot of other things going on is pretty high. And so nothing can maybe make you feel even lonelier than misunderstanding. And so how do you approach this? How do you weigh? Because clearly there's in using technology, you able to gain speed and efficiency. Obviously that's helpful. Like you can only do so much with people and cost of labor. And so obviously there is a benefit. There's also this thing as we are leading with more technology and AI, the human touch becomes ever more premium and important and a sign of luxury. The sort of the imperfect, perfect moment, right? So I'm curious, how do you tell that story? How do you make sure that it legally makes sense, minimizes risk, and yet also gives you a chance to take advantage of 21st century tools to actually be there for folks in big moments and small?
Yeah, I think having your rules of the roads, like I'm not involved in every AI decision, but now that we've reached our compromise, if this is how we're going to approach things, I think the business, they follow what we've agreed to. So it's, I think, really great when you can work on these guidelines and then the business kind of handles it. They don't have to come over to me to sign off on every decision they're making. That way they can execute quickly, but I understand, we've all made this risk decision that we're comfortable with.
So there is some level of trust that you've been able to get to with your stakeholders, likely because of they now understand the first set of principles that you work from, so they can maybe independently make decisions that likely will be in the range. How did you get there? How do you develop that relationship with your internal stakeholders that they can effectively experience what I call an ability to read Olga's mind?
Yeah.
Or Angela's mind.
Yeah. I think it comes from the relationships with the people that are leading those organizations, having really close relationships with our CIO and other people that report to them, just so we know this is where we're aligned. We've all agreed this is how we're going to proceed. And so then it's much easier for their supporting people to understand, hey, this is what our leader has said and we're going to follow it. So we don't have to relitigate every decision because we've all figured out our alignment.
I love this. We're coming to the end. I do have a couple of questions, especially you essentially started as more commercial counsel, dealing very heavily in compliance, but essentially becoming a product lawyer, something near and dear to my heart. I deeply care about it. And I do think that building responsible products is increasingly an important skill among in-house lawyers. And I love how you're balancing those things and building relationships and training folks in your organizations to basically have a meeting of the minds, right? To be on the same page and effectively counsel them even when you're not there, and having an experience of them kind of understanding where you come from and essentially reading your mind. I'm curious, that's a very challenging role, especially in the age of transformative technologies such as AI, because a lot of things are in flight and points in time and can move. What is it that you're still working in your practice? What kind of skills or tools you're perfecting to be even more effective at doing this type of what I think is a very challenging role?
Yeah, I think taking the time to connect with people as much as we can. They're all still people at the end of the day. So understanding their motivations, their background story helps a lot. But I'm using the AI to become more effective and efficient because we all have more. It's just a very high volume role that I have. And so I really appreciate technology's ability to help me to be more efficient. So that's what I'm trying to do, is just have increasingly improving work product. And I think AI helps me get there.
I love that. And what are some sort of attributes of a leader in your position who are giving commercial advice, also navigating compliance, and in the end, trying to bring responsible products forward in the marketplace that brings returns to stakeholders? What is it, some key attributes of leaders you think are important, especially in the age of transformative technologies such as AI?
I think the ability to listen, to understand people's challenges, having compassion for the pain points that they're dealing with all the time, and just trying to do what we can to kind of address the risks of the area that they're dealing with, but doing it in a way that is compassionate, understanding where they're coming from.
And looking back, I actually never asked you what inspired you to go to law school. Maybe you can weave it into the question. Looking back as to why you went to law school and like looking at the paths you took, maybe some law firm and then in-house as commercial, transitioning into compliance and essentially product counseling role. What is something you would tell your younger self that maybe you were worried about that would help to know in hindsight 2020, or folks who are starting out on that path that you would think is helpful?
I went to law school because no one in my family had gone to college or law school. I loved debate. I loved researching and reading. And the judges that I encountered in debate were often lawyers. So I was like, oh, I'll do that. And it's funny, I wish I would have done the Gallup Strengths Finder. So I would tell my younger self that, do the Gallup Strengths Finder, because I realized I'm very high on harmony. And so I think that in-house work is like a good area for me because I'm helping find compromise. I'm helping find solutions and a path forward. Whereas I know not all lawyers are in that position. They're more kind of fighting constantly and putting out fires. And that's just not where I like to be. Just really thankful that I found a place where I can flourish. And I would tell my younger self, even the higher up people making the big decisions, they're people at the end of the day. So just taking time to connect with them. Some people need more time to think about things. Some leaders are happy to make quick decisions. So trying to understand the decision-making process of the people that we're working with and just who they are at the end of the day are all great ways to approach our partnerships.
You said something that no one on my show has yet said, and I actually want to go a little deeper on. There's a high in harmony piece. And as that being a sort of an attribute that actually helps you in your role, maybe define a little bit more what that means. There's obviously, it sounds like what it is, but maybe explain what that practically means and how it translates every day, and then how you feel this sort of being high in harmony actually helps you to get to outcomes that are helpful in your role and for your business and for the stakeholders around you.
Yeah, I also have connectedness as one of my top 5 as well. Yeah, the kind of challenging part of harmony can be that when people are angry, yelling, it can make you want to shrink back in yourself. But having that relationship already and understanding that the business people they're just trying to do their job. So just trying to get back to where are our common points? How are we connected? We can all align to this vision of where we're going. And if it's compliance, hey, if we have these nasty fees, that's going to cut into our profits. I hate to go there, but that's always an option too. Just, hey, we're all aligned on winning, but it's going to be a challenge to win if we don't make the right choice here. Yep, I think just connecting to people is the way to deal with the challenging parts of wanting harmony.
And curious, because you're very self-aware about sort of those attributes and how they help you to high in harmony and high in connecting. How did you get to the point of reflecting who you are and how those attributes may be helpful or not helpful in what circumstances? Because it's not something that folks get up in the morning and start measuring themselves all around. So how did you get there and what tools do you find helpful for that purpose?
Yeah, I was in a challenging position where I had moved to Nebraska. We wanted to be closer to my husband's family, and there's a couple law schools here. And so it was just challenging to find the right jobs. I ended up at an insurance defense firm. Doing depositions and making people cry was not my favorite. And so I was just in this position where I had to figure out what's important to me, how I still want to be a lawyer. So how can I make this work? And so the Gallup Strengths Finder really did help me think about what kind of roles I needed to go for that would be a better fit for me. And so it really has been a guiding light for me. And then I was at one law firm, the Gooseman law firm, that they literally had everybody's strengths printed out by their name on their desk. So people could we always say treat people like you want to be treated, but I think it's actually maybe more kind to treat people the way they want to be treated. If they need more time to make decisions, giving them that, not expecting a quick decision. So it has been, I think, important. And belief is another one of my top ones. I really need to believe in what I'm doing. So being at a company is easier, especially publicly traded ones. I can read their financials and see how things are going. And a company that's really open with where things are going strategy-wise helps a lot too. So it's really been a guiding principle for me, those strengths.
I love it. We've come to the end, and I love what we covered and the insights you shared, and I love the deep dive on being high on harmony and how it's helpful in your role and in the age of AI and transformative technologies. What is the one thing you want folks to remember or do after they are listening to our conversations and reflecting on all the things you shared?
Yeah, I think just remembering to take the time to connect with people at all levels of your organization, especially the end users, so that you can have those stories to bring back to the leaders that you're trying to influence. The law is what it is, but coming to people with that lens of how it's affecting their business and the people that use their products, I really think helps give them the perspective they need to make the best decisions.
Angela, thank you so much for this inspiring conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you, me too. I so appreciate all the thought leadership you share, and thank you for being a leader in our legal community. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much. And thank you, viewers, for joining. I'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you for stopping by. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Notes to My Legal Self. Know someone who'd make a great guest? Let us know. Self-nominations are encouraged. They are an act of courage. Remember, the future of law is bright. Enjoy your in-house practice. It's an adventure of a lifetime. See you soon.